If you've ever watched the news, you've no doubt seen some pretty crazy hurricane footage. But have you ever wondered what hurricane was the worst ever? If you have, you, my friend, have stumbled into the right video today, because we at Factaholic are bringing you the top 10 worst hurricanes of all time. Now, you may find other lists titled the top 10 worst hurricanes ever with different hurricanes or in a different order. That's because there's many ways to judge a hurricane: wind speed, property damage, lives lost. Well, we like to get it straight, so we have our own algorithm with a mixture of those three components to determine our list. Without further ado, let's get them straight. Number 10. Hurricane Ivan. This 2004 Category 3 storm hit Alabama on September 16th, destroying large swaths of coastline in Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida thanks to its 120-mile-per-hour wind, 50-foot high waves, and 14-foot storm surge. Making the storm all that much worse, it just kept coming. While it hit Alabama as a Cat 3, it actually was listed as a Cat 5 on 3 different occasions, including when it passed by Cuba. Even after it weakened after hitting the American mainland, it produced massive amounts of rain and gave birth to numerous tornadoes across the southeastern United States. Ivan was ultimately blamed for the death of 114 people in the United States, Grenada, Jamaica, Dominican Republic, Venezuela, Cayman Islands, and Barbados. Damage estimates were more than $27 billion. Number 9. Hurricane Sandy. It's 2012 and Hurricane Sandy just ripped through Jamaica, Cuba, and Haiti on its way up the east coast of the United States, doing massive damage in New York City and New Jersey. There were reported storm surges of 13 feet in lower Manhattan, turning the Big Apple into a virtual ghost town and knocking out power for days in parts of the city. Some beaches on Staten Island and Queens ceased to exist after the Category 3 storm swept through. Sandy destroyed or damaged about 650,000 homes in the Northeast U.S. and killed at least 186 people. The economic impact was some $65 billion in losses. Number 8. Camille. We're going back to the summer of love for this one. As Woodstock wrapped up in upstate New York, Hurricane Camille brought heavy flooding and 200-mile-per-hour winds to the Gulf Coast and later Virginia in August 1969. It was just the second Cat 5 hurricane to hit the continental United States since 1900. Building near the Cayman Islands, Camille stormed through Cuba and picked up speed in the Gulf of Mexico before hitting land in Mississippi on the 18th of August. While wind gusts were estimated to top 200 miles per hour, exact speed is unknown. Camille took out the weather instruments. A 24-foot storm surge also contributed to major devastation in Mississippi. Camille eventually weakened to a tropical storm as it moved up the East Coast and reached Virginia. But the storm continued to dump rain on the region, contributing to flash flooding and mudslides in southern Virginia. The storm resulted in 256 deaths and more than $1.4 billion in damage. Worth noting, it's thanks to Camille that we gauge hurricanes as Category 1 through 5. Following the disaster, the Saffir-Simpson Hurricane Wind Scale was created. The purpose of the scale is to tell residents what they're up against, but it's mostly used by the Weather Channel to drum up ratings. Number 7. Gilbert. In September 1988, Category 5 Hurricane Gilbert destroyed nearly 80% of Jamaica's homes, completely covering the island on the weather map. At 575 miles in diameter, Gilbert is one of the largest hurricanes ever observed by terms of sheer size. Gilbert then moved on to the Cayman Islands and Mexico, among other areas, before weakening and crossing into Texas, where it turned into a series of tornadoes. The storm caused 318 deaths and about $5.5 billion in damage. Gilbert wreaked so much havoc that the World Meteorological Organization retired the name in the spring of 1989, replacing it with Gordon. Speaking of retiring hurricane names, they didn't even have names until 1953, which is why our number 6 is simply called the Labor Day Hurricane of 1935, or the 1935 Florida Keys Labor Day Hurricane. This Category 5 storm brought 200-mile-per-hour winds and just buckets of rain to the upper and middle Florida Keys, killing almost 400 people, more than half of whom were World War I veterans who were busy working on a highway from Key West to Key Largo and found themselves defenseless when the storm came hunting. In 1935, of course, we didn't have Doppler radar and weather tracking satellites, so they didn't know where the hurricane would hit until it did. The Labor Day hurricane did about $6 million in damage in 1935 dollars in the United States alone. Number 5. Katrina. Anyone old enough to remember 2005 most certainly remembers Hurricane Katrina and what came after. Hurricane Katrina wasn't a huge storm when it hit land. Sure, it started as a Category 5, but by the time it hit New Orleans, it was just a Category 3. But New Orleans wasn't prepared. Infrastructure issues resulted in nearly 80% of the coastal city ending up under the water. Some people refused to evacuate, others wanted to but couldn't. It's said that 40% of the staggering 1,833 deaths were from drowning. At $161 billion in damages, Katrina is considered the costliest hurricane in U.S. history. The Federal Emergency Management Agency called it the single most catastrophic natural disaster in U.S. history. Some 400,000 people were displaced by the storm. Many never came home, worried that they wouldn't be safe in New Orleans. I just want to take a second here to point out that the costliest hurricane in history is only number 5 on our list. Makes you wonder what we've got coming up. Also, this would be a good time for you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. If you hit that bell icon, you'll be notified of all of our upcoming videos. And as one of the guys that writes the scripts, I'm telling you, you want to be notified of what we've got coming up. Okay, back to the list. Number 4. Maria. 2017 was crazy. Hurricane Maria was the second Category 5 of the 2017 season, following behind Hurricane Irma. Literally. In fact, one of the things that made Maria so bad was it passed through several of the areas that had just been hit by Irma 2 weeks prior. Maria struck land on the island of Dominica on September 18, 2017, with wind speeds of 175 miles per hour, then moved on to Guadalupe and the U.S. Virgin Islands before absolutely destroying the island of Puerto Rico on September 20th. Maria gives us an interesting look at the occasional disparity between official numbers and reality. Officially, the death toll from Maria was levied at 146, but the Puerto Rican government later revised the death toll to 2,975 in August 2018, almost a year after the disaster. Their final figures came after an investigation from George Washington University. In addition to the nearly 3,000 lives lost, there was some $91 billion in damage, and at one point, nearly 90% of Puerto Rico was without electricity. 4 years later, the island is still rebuilding. Number 3. Galveston Hurricane of 1900. We have to go back 121 years for our number 3 spot. The Galveston Hurricane of 1900 killed an estimated 6,000 to 12,000 people, mostly in Texas, in September 1900, and is considered the deadliest hurricane in U.S. history. What made the storm so bad is that it took a sharp left when it hit the Florida Keys, catching Texas off guard. They had just 4 days to prepare. The Category 4 storm brought 20-foot storm surges and flash flooding to the region, and even pounded Oklahoma and Kansas when it was done with Texas. More than 3,600 homes, as well as a number of structures believed to be storm-proof, were destroyed in the hurricane, whose damage totaled $30 million. That's $1,900, of course, about $1 billion today. Number 2. Hurricane Mitch. I'm going to be honest, I don't remember Hurricane Mitch, and I was certainly old enough in 1998 to remember it, but it just didn't get the attention of some of the other storms on our list. That said, it certainly did some damage. The slow-moving hurricane seemingly paused once it reached Honduras in October 1998, dumping up to 4 inches of rain an hour for 2 days, causing mudslides and deadly flooding along the way, leading to some 11,000 people confirmed dead and thousands more missing. Mitch is the second deadliest hurricane on record and the worst to hit the Western Hemisphere in more than 200 years. The storm caused more than $5 billion in damage in Honduras, where much of the country's infrastructure and crops were completely destroyed. Nicaragua was also devastated by Mitch, losing 2,000 people in one mudslide alone. I also don't remember our top hurricane on our list. But to be fair, neither does anyone else. That's because it was 240 years ago. The aptly titled Great Hurricane of 1780, also known as the Hurricán del Calixto, the Great Hurricane of the Antilles, the Great Hurricane of the West Indies, and the 1780 disaster, ran roughshod over the Caribbean islands, taking 22,000 people to their graves when the storm passed through the islands from October 10th to the 16th. While we don't have scientific data to say what the wind speeds were, it's believed that it struck Barbados as a Category 5 hurricane, with at least one estimate of wind speeds as high as 200 miles per hour, before moving past Martinique, St. Lucia, St. Eustatius, and causing thousands of deaths on those islands. Coming in the midst of the American Revolution, the storm caused heavy losses to the British fleet contesting for control of the area, largely weakening British control over the Atlantic. The hurricane later passed near Puerto Rico and over the eastern portion of Hispaniola, causing heavy damage near the coastlines. It ultimately turned to the northeast and was last observed on October 20th, southeast of Atlantic Canada. The death toll from the Great Hurricane alone exceeds that of many entire decades of Atlantic hurricanes. Estimates are marginally higher than for Hurricane Mitch, the second deadliest Atlantic storm, for which figures are likely more precise. The hurricane was part of the disastrous 1780 Atlantic hurricane season, with two other deadly storms occurring in October. And there you have it. What do you think? Have you ever lived through a hurricane? If so, please tell us your experience in the comments section below. And then make it a point to share this video with your friends on Facebook, Twitter, and whatever new social media has likely been created since we made this. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you soon.